Tu podcast w głowie się mieści. Okay, so hello everyone. It's a Wrap Your Head Around It podcast w głowie się mieści, and my today guest, I think that he don't need any introduction, but it's always not easy for me to do any introductions because it stresses me a lot, but I do. Professor Kelly Wilson, he's a professor psychology at the University of the Mississippi. Yes, you was because you retired already. Yeah, as I find out.
Yeah, emeritus they call it, which means that I don't really have an active role though I'm still affiliated with the university.
Yeah. And also you are a co-founder, co-author of Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. You are also the world-known the ACT trainer, and not only because you in general teach others how to help people, how to help others. And I'd like to warmly welcome you, and maybe you would want to introduce yourself in the way that you like. It's also not easy part for my guests sometimes, but maybe you do it better than me.
Oh, goodness. I don't know. I've been introduced all kinds of ways over the years. Usually I feel a little awkward when people are introducing me. I suppose I identify most strongly with my roles as a teacher. I very much love being a college professor, and as a theoretician and a treatment developer. Sometimes treatment developers there's people who provide treatment, and then there are researchers, and sometimes those worlds are very, very separate. I'm one that was always quite devoted to teaching my students, even the ones who would go on to be researchers, to be very thoughtful clinicians, because it seems to me that people who are kind of deeply engaged in psychotherapy will ask better research questions. So how's that for an introduction?
Yeah, thanks. And as I know from you are also an author of a lot of books. I know that it changes fast. I also did an interview with Professor Hayes. I also said the numbers of the article that they wasn't actual, but many of your books for the practitioners, but also self-help books, which I know from. I also recommend them to my patients. They are very, very useful, and one in Poland is published by GWP, Gdańskie Wydawnictwo Psychologiczne. It calls the Polish name of the book, the Polish title is Życie bez nałogu, so it's like a life without addiction. And the second one is w sieci natrętnych myśli. So it's like in the net of intrusive thoughts. So you are also a book author.
I think 100 or so articles and chapters, and maybe 11 books, I suppose. Although I haven't written a new book in probably a decade. So
I know that your way to be at the place that you are now, you are a professor, like a world-known trainer, the the treatment developer, like your way also wasn't easy, and it was like I think that this is something that is very acty, yeah, very human, that we all suffers. And I know that you also had like a lot of traumas during your life, a lot of suffer. And is it okay? I'd like to ask you about like what was the turning point in your life that you turn into the way of the, maybe not way, but into your values. What was the key point that start to on the beginning to like try to develop treatment method?
If I look back, the thing you're referring to, I've always been pretty open about my own history and how I found my way into the work. I was a sort of a person who was late to education, so I did not start college until I was 30. And prior to that period of time, I was enormously. I mean, if you would have, if there would have had there been anyone diagnosing me or anything like that, I was terribly depressed, typically, just sort of chronically suicidal, and deeply, deeply addicted to drugs and alcohol, and was high every day, and took intoxication to levels that were frightening even for the people who I hung out with, who were, mostly people who were doing the same sort of things as me. So, I mean, I was in sort of hot pursuit of escape from a really, what I felt was just an intolerable state of being. I wanted to go away, and I made some pretty close approaches to going away. I crashed a lot of cars and was involved in a certain amount of violence, and ended up hospitalized, and probably should have been, but wasn't hospitalized, for numerous drug overdoses. Stopped using injectable, drugs just about, 10 minutes before the AIDS epidemic, exploded. My life was really mostly about escape and my inability to escape. It was punctuated by some good things, exciting things, but mostly they ended up wrecked. Mostly everything that I came in contact with was damaged, and I had a pretty good story and a pretty good evidence base, that I could point to, that, if you knew me and you cared about me, you were going to take damage. And the closer you were, the more damage you would end up taking. And, this was not an irrational belief. I could point, I knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak. I could point to the harms I'd caused to others and to myself. And I think I carried a quite fundamental assumption that that's all there was that until something stopped me finally. And in 1985, the winter of 1985, my second wife had left me, and I'd gone on this just this binge of intoxication that was just like relentless and bloody and horrifying, enough that no one wanted to be near me. I mean, it was just terrifying to be near me because people felt like if they, one friend who I had reached out to had called my wife and commented had said that he was afraid to go to the bathroom because, he might come out of the bathroom and find me, dead on his couch or something like that, And he wasn't far from wrong. That episode landed me in a locked psychiatric facility. And so I spent a month in a locked psychiatric hospital, and then another month in a drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility. And I remember it might have been memory is fuzzy. It was a long time ago, almost 40 years ago. And I was, really toxic, but I remember there was this meeting that I was in. It was like a group therapy meeting at this hospital.
Yeah, so it's...
And there was a guy sitting across from me at the table in this meeting. And so I'm in there and I'm, emaciated and shaking and sweating. And this guy sitting across from me, kind of tells this story about, that sounded like my life. Not the particulars, but the kind of chaos of it, the destructiveness of it. And there was some moment when he looked across the table at me, and he said, "You can stop," and it's a simple thing, an obvious thing to anyone external to the situation. But it was something that I didn't know, that I could stop, and I don't, it's not like I knew how that could possibly happen. But I had this sense that
creates a desire or something that I want to stop, or some kind of...
I always wanted to stop.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to, but I just, it was just like wanting to flap my arms and fly, I remember telling my wife then, birdie's got to fly, fish has got to swim. And I'm a dope fiend, and that's what I am, It was it's hard to describe from the outside, but from the inside, the full extent of the world I inhabited involved me doing damage to other people and myself until I ceased to exist. And there just wasn't anything outside of that. But in that moment, it was like I knew that he recognized me, like he knew who he was talking to. And I could see it, it wasn't like the work was done that day or anything, but it sort of pointed a direction for me. And I started to learn something about acceptance and about willingness and about letting go of managing how I felt. And you know, I was fortunate. I encountered a stream of people along the way who saw things in me that I couldn't see in myself. And I took a kind of a bumpy start. But eventually, you know, I mean, my last mistake didn't kill me. And I encountered people who, you know, they understood. I mean, I remember when I decided that I was like not going to die, like on purpose, you know. I mean, because before that, I pretty much planned to die on purpose. And when I decided to stay alive, I remember this kind of promise to myself that was something like, but it will be for something. And that for something, which, you know, I couldn't have...
Give an answer what it would be.
Have named it.
Named it, yeah.
You know, I couldn't have named it. But for something, you know, something that would make it, that would, you know, that I would look back and I would say, I'm glad I stayed. It was worth it. And
and from here and now, when you look at the past, do you know what the value was that stayed you, like that you choose to be alive? Maybe not, probably not only one, but maybe it was, you know.
Yeah, but that's right. You're right. At the time, I probably would have named single things, you know, I might have been able to come up with. But the truth is, you know, experience is much more varied than that. And so, in fact, I could name a host of things, any single one of which I would say made every ache and pain worth it, including the fact that I had people around me who I think intuited that process, that project that I was undertaking, and really, you know, took it seriously and helped me and pointed me towards other people and other conversations that could help me. And many of those were within psychology, but others were in literature and
philosophy,
philosophy,
as I know,
and so it was, you know. And I mean, I think now, I mean, I don't know that I could really take credit for it. I mean, it really all seems kind of astonishing that, because it didn't happen. I mean, many of the people who I was spending my time with back in those days are dead. You know, they just, you know, they just didn't make it.
And what was the beginning of, like, your side of the story of acceptance and commitment therapy as a co-author, like from the point that you decided to end up with, like, your previous life, and what was the moment, and how did you create with others, with Stephen Hayes, acceptance and commitment therapy?
Well, you know, my very first mentor, who was a behavior analyst, who was one of these people who kind of took what I was interested in seriously, introduced me to some people who had a tremendous influence on me, among them people like Willard Day, the late Willard Day, sadly, the late Mike Dewar. But Sam Leegland introduced me to these people. And another, and he was just pouring articles into my lap that related to the kinds of things, permitted the kinds of things I was interested in. And one of those was the very first chapter ever written on acceptance and commitment therapy. Although it was not called that at the time, it was called comprehensive distancing. But anyway, I got it in like page proof, so it wasn't, the book was not out. But, you know, if you know people who are writing things, then they pass these things along. So I got this chapter when I was an undergraduate, and it was about that therapy applied to panic. But it seemed just terribly relevant to addiction to me. I mean, I read it and I was just sort of like, oh man, this guy's been reading my mail, you know, like, you know, I read that metaphor about dropping the rope, you know, like that, you know, that old metaphor of, you know, when you're in the tug of war with the, you know, monster and you know, you're about to be dragged into the abyss, and, you know, you don't have enough strength to win. And there's this alternative, you know, which is to drop the rope. You know, I think in some ways that guy that was in that meeting, you know, that first completely toxic night I spent in the hospital, you know, when he said you can stop, you know, I think that's what he was pointing to. At least I recognized it in that way. And so, you know, I mean, I got introduced to Steve. I reached out and got an interview there, and, you know, at the University of Nevada, Reno. And, you know, Steve was just another one along the line who recognized what I was trying to do. And a big part of that was that my affection for Frankl and for meaning and purpose. And he recognized very on in the late 80s, early 90s, that some of that thinking needed to be in act.
It shows like how important and powerful the values are, that someone who is in a death camp, that he can survive, and he wanted to. Like, it's like, for me, this is just something outstanding. It could very influence life.
Yes. When the last time I visited Warsaw, I made a trip out to Auschwitz, and I remember standing on that ground, you know, that Frankl stood on, and picking up this stone and kind of holding it in my hand, and you know, laying it back on the ground, and just I don't know, that it was a guiding force, and I wanted to understand that through this kind of behavioral lens. And you know, and Steve was just like super supportive of that, and really of all of my kind of wandering things that I was interested in, you know, depth psychology. You know, I hung out with a psychoanalyst, and there were things in that work that interested me. And Steve was, you know, very supportive of that. And the result of my, you know, just diving into the work. I mean, if you get the timeline, it's ridiculous. Like 1985, I'm in a locked psychiatric hospital. 1989, I'm Steve Hayes' student, you know, digging into behavioral analysis of purpose and meaning. So it's kind of...
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like crazy that terms that it's like someone would say that this is impossible, but it shows how we cannot give up when we have some problems. Like keep trying, and then like you said, and how your life shows that that we cannot give up. Yeah, and like go to our like dreams, values. Like it's beautiful and like very touches me very much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I know that you also likes it's a joke, but the Ashtanga yoga, from your previous that also it was a part of your life, like very important, like to practice, learn yoga.
I mean, my wife has commented on this before, and lots of other people. I'm a creature of great enthusiasms. So I get interested in something. I get really interested.
Yeah.
And, things, it's because, I see in them things that I need. There was about a 10-year period there where I was, practicing yoga on pretty much a daily basis. It put me in a community of a certain sort. It put me in a role of a certain sort. Like I was used to being the teacher. Mm-hmm. And instead of being the teacher, I was the student. And that was really good. I talk a lot, and instead of talking a lot, I was in a practice where you don't really talk at all. And, I learned a bit about stillness and relearned, to live inside of my own body. Like, again, it's not like an astonishing thing. I mean, we all know that mm-hmm. we inhabit these bodies and that it matters how we treat them, but it's easy to get distracted from that.
Yeah, to be also on a track, of taking care. Like, I think that we all, like, a good example is when there is a beginning of the new year and everyone says, oh, I go to the, like, for example, yoga studio. Yeah. And after the couple of weeks, like, there is no sight, like we often quit very quickly, those kinds of things. Yeah. And
yeah, people quit and then they condemn themselves for quitting.
Yeah.
People are pretty hard on themselves. It's I mean, if we met somebody who was as mean to us as we are, there's a psychoanalytic writer, a British guy who I have been really smitten by lately. His name is Adam Phillips. And I saw a talk he gave the other day where he said something like, or I think it's on YouTube, I'm not sure. But anyway, he gave this talk where he was saying, if we met somebody who was that mean, we would think, that's terrible and something really awful must have happened to that person to be that way, to be so mean. We could be very mean to ourselves.
Yeah.
I actually, many of the things I become very enthusiastic about, I don't end up following through with, or I follow through for some period of time, and then I get interested in something else.
Yeah, but on your lectures, like I've been, I saw your lecture about on the university, SWPS, yeah, university, about the lifestyle medicine. Like your lecture was full of the knowledge from like the behaviorism, psychology, genetics, and so it's like a full package. So it shows how it's good to be interested not only like, I think that it's also hard to be interested in one special point, because when you like for example I remember talking about the joints, and that in the joints that we have some fluids, and like you said, like it shows how everything is connected to each other, and how our bodies, and I think how we as a humans, how we are complicated. Yeah, like I don't know, is it a good word, complicated, but maybe.
I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
We're complicated, and not just complicated, but the connections among those complications is substantially obscure. You know, I mean, it isn't obvious to us. You know, I mean, the ways that things connect or might connect or can connect are, you know, not known. I mean, I suppose I think about, and my sort of current enthusiasm is, and I mean, I could see aspects of this all the way going backwards, but, you know, living as a creative process, psychotherapy as a fundamentally creative process, which in part means that you don't really know what you're going to make in advance entirely. And, you know, if you watch artists work and creative people work, you know, they'll put together things that, you know, we just don't ordinarily put together. You know, they'll put media together, they'll create prompts for creativity that are, you know, not logical necessarily. And, you know, that interests me, you know. And so, you know, if you're thinking, the problem, you know, people like say, oh, I'm going to go to the yoga studio, you know, and this time I really mean it. And if they think that is some kind of like a moral thing or something, then if they don't go, then they've failed morally, and there's what it means about them as a person. But, you know, if you're doing creative work, well, you know, some pots that you are creating just flop over, and some things that you try, you know, they take you a certain direction and then they stop. But, you know, that all seems fine to me at this point.
Sure. And like from your point of view, is there any like area of acceptance and commitment therapy that is special for you, that for you as a teacher, and but also as a therapist, that like influence you the most, or that you care the most? Like it could be not only the process, but in general, like when you look at the ACT model and ACT therapy, what is like for you most important?
I suppose, you know, I'm at a place of, you know, where I reflect a lot on the work I've done and what's come of that, and what interests me, and what I hope for. And so I suppose right now, you know, when you're doing creative work in terms of treatment development, kind of how to think about human struggles and how to think about the things that keep people it's difficult to be heard in the midst of that, because that environment, the environment of treatment development, is a highly critical environment. It's always, you have to justify every damn thing you say. There's little parentheses after every sentence where you've got 4 or 5 citations that make it okay that you said that thing you just said. And, before you speak, you have to do some exposition that gets people ready for you to say what it is that you have to say. And this context of justification, although it's important and it has its value, is not a really terribly good environment for creative work. Like imagine that you were standing over the shoulder of somebody who was painting and they started to just sort of loosely sketch a few lines and you were like, I don't know, that looks a little high. Is that really accurate?
Why
you would never paint.
Why the color?
It would just destroy you. And so one concern that I have is kind of I think one of the real assets that we had early on was that we just weren't very important. We were just this little small world, and inside of that little small world that we could really play, and it was good for creative work. We were successful in getting that in front of a lot of people, and so now we're looking at there are like 1,000 plus randomized controlled trials, and work often in those contexts ends up being quite proceduralized, formalized. And so, I suppose I spend a fair amount of my time interested in talking about the development of act or whatever act is becoming. I don't really have any, I don't have any investment in act per se. I have an investment in understanding to help people move forward in their lives. Like I want to be a voice for openness and creativity in the development of the work going forward. Like I'm okay with procedures. I'm all right with that. But you can get trapped by, you get procedures that like work really well and you get sort of tunnel vision around those things. And
became too rigid.
I was out. I do a lot of trail, slow trail running on these mountainous trails.
Yeah, I've seen on your Facebook.
It's a good time for me to, it's a place for me to think. And
you run with the barefoot, like without shoes, or?
I used to, but Arizona has just ended up being there's just too many thorns and sharp rocks. But I run minimally clad, and I never run with, headphones in. I'm immersed, in the run and in poetry and like in what I'm reading. And day before yesterday, when I was running up the mountain, there's a really steep section. So it's a mile or so where you just climb. It's pretty just relentlessly steep climbing. And I was thinking about this book that I'm reading right now, which I'm so enjoying it, And I was thinking how grateful I was that, I'll be 69 years old this year. And I was thinking how grateful I was for being influenceable, like so readily enchanted and influenced, and that I can read things that are very far distant from the work that I've done that provoke me to look at the things that I care about in new ways. I think, what a wonderful thing to remain impressionable.
Yeah.
So I hope that ACT stays impressionable. Now I realize that can to some people just sort of sounds like anything goes, and well, I don't think that's right, but I hope that ACT stays permeable.
Yeah, and I think that it shows how, when you were talking about the mountains and like the last book that influenced you, and like the way you were talking, like I've seen a picture, like you standing with a book, and like I feel that how big way you became to be like at this point with this book, on the Arizona mountains. Like it's incredible.
It's fortunate.
Yeah.
And I was speaking with my sister yesterday. I was thinking about her on that run a lot also, and I spoke with her yesterday. And January, February, and March are the birth dates of my brother Randy, my brother Michael, and my brother David. So, and my sister and I buried, 3 of my brothers, and I was talking to her yesterday about, because you can't help but wonder about the meaning of those things, when you survive. And we were kind of joking, like it's not like we were the strongest or anything like that. Matter of fact, if you had lined all 5 of us up, you would have picked me as, I would have been the one most likely to cry, most afraid, or at least I sure looked it, and, but, my last mistake didn't kill me or my sister, and we both, we both live to bear witness to, what we've seen and done. That seems worthwhile,
Yeah.
One of the many, many things that made me glad I stayed, my children, my very long relationship with my wife. Will be together 44 years this year.
Wow. So yeah, I wish everyone like so long relationship, and I think that like to be with someone, it's like also probably not always easy, and like it shows how we must like learn how to accept, how to like, it's also, I think it shows very good like the ACT model in life. Yeah, that like having values, and and I also saw your pictures with also your wife running. She running too, yeah, as I remember. Good, yeah.
Yeah. We go together sometimes.
Yeah. And like, how do you think how ACT will evolve in some way, and maybe we as like listening to your previous interviews, like I have a desire to ask you about, maybe you have some thoughts about we as a human, as because you are also the evolutionary psychologist, how we as a human can evolve, or like, how do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that I am not naive, but that I'm optimistic, because I think that David Sloan Wilson, who I've been fortunate to get to know over the last, I don't know how long it's been, quite a while, 10, 15 years, I suppose. David thinks that human cooperation is the sort of crown jewel of human evolution. And I think that David is right about that. And I think that we have survived through some incredibly daunting conditions. And, now we face some existential threats that are of our own creation. And so the question is, will that ability to cooperate allow us to continue? I think we will. And unlike when I was in my 20s and hoped that I would die sooner than later, now I hope that I live quite a long time, because I really want to see what happens. I want to see what's next. Life has turned out just so remarkably different than I expected. It could hardly, I couldn't overstate how different it has turned out than I expected. And so, it makes me curious. I hope that, within the evolution of ACT, I think in some ways the development, some aspects of the development of ACT have been unfortunate artifacts of a research era that has been focused on protocols applied to syndromes. And I think that is a blunt instrument in understanding and advancing the treatment of human suffering. It's not that it tells you nothing, but it doesn't tell you
it's
I
not
think
good
what
for
you need to know.
For everyone, to put it opens the discussion also about the diagnosis, and the also one of the newest, in Poland, newest, in US, it's not a new book, but Beyond DSM. So it's big amount of information about the diagnosis and how they could be how we can miss a lot, how we can miss a human being when we are not aware of a lot of other circumstances, context of someone's.
Yeah, I think that, I was deeply interested in, early in my training, and I think it is kind of infused in the work that I've done over the years, a deep interest in the kind of phenomenology of suffering, the kind of moment by moment experience of it. And I don't think that there is nearly enough of that sensitivity and sensibility in the sort of universe of randomized controlled trials. There's a quite interesting article, and I can't think of the author. It wasn't one that I was familiar with. I think it came out of Netherlands, but it was a phenomenological author talking about depression and the erosion of we experiences. Mm-hmm. So the person living their life in such a way that they have many experiences in their life that one might call we seeing, we doing, we knowing, that sort of a psychological isolation. And it was a terribly interesting article, and I thought really pointed to a kind of a really important bit of phenomenology that exists in lots and lots of difficulties that we have. And, I read it from the beginning to the end, which is rare for me. I mean, mostly, I find a lot of scientific writing just so boring that I can just barely stand to read a whole article.
Abstract.
Well, you start reading the introduction, and even the first part of the introduction is kind of, like.
For me, the numbers, they confuse me.
Tell me what you're interested in, But part of that is that sort of deep, you're so embedded in the justification of what it is that you say that most of what you say isn't even what you have to say. It's just the justification for saying what it is you have to say. And, you can just get lost in it, It was, I understand the need of justification. It's not like, anything goes, and it's a random universe. And I don't think that. I don't think people should do just anything. But, it's like we have an accountant who does our taxes, but the accounts aren't more important than the lives. When I worked at the university, I would become very frustrated with the administration because it was almost like at times like the administration was more important than my interaction with my students, which I think a university is not, that is what it is about. The function is me being in the room with my students.
What is more important? My next question is also because here, maybe not only in Poland, but on the Ukraine, there is a war, and here in Poland also we have I think many people now have financial problems and so on and so on. Is there something that you, for example, from your experience, life experiences, is there something that you will say to those people? What, from the ACT perspective, or what would help people with traumatized people now? In what would be words from you about this topic?
Yeah, I wish it were in my power to alleviate that suffering, the dread. And I know that is so close for the people of Poland. It's very near for you, and must certainly trigger, such a long and deep history of struggles. I can only imagine how very hard it must be at multiple levels. Not just what's happening right now, but all of the sort of echoes that of the people of Poland, to have some autonomy and some, ability to, just live and be in the world, live and work and care for one another. And my heart certainly goes out to the people of Ukraine in the same way. I wish that I had something I could say that could be of help. But but really, my capacity is limited to, maybe acknowledging how complex and difficult a struggle that people are finding themselves, in right now. I hope that they are able to achieve the, integrity of their homes, and help make the homes of people like the people of Poland safer, kinder, more humane.
Yeah. Help each other. Yeah, it's something very important here.
Cooperation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how also we can be connected as humans, and help one each other. So it's, I think, like from my perspective, like when it begins, how people start to, sharing their own homes with people they don't know. Like, I think this is like you said about the hope about evolving. We as humans, I hope also that we'll be evolving this way, like to be like together and help each other.
One of the most profound museum experiences that I've ever had, I can't think of the name of it, but maybe you would know it. But there's a museum in Warsaw that takes you through the history of the place through the Second World War.
Yes,
and it has, it's not like a kind of a traditional museum where, here's something in glass and here's something in glass. It's got a lot of like artifacts, and
I know
it's a little maze-like and a little dark, but it's profound.
I know the Polish name of this museum.
Yes,
Yeah.
What is it called?
Muzeum Powstania Warszawskiego. It's in English would be Warsaw Uprising Museum. Oh, yeah.
Warsaw, that's it. Yes.
Yeah,
Warsaw
you can listen
Uprising.
things. Yeah, like it's like you can experience with a lot of senses thing there. Like you can listen, watch movies, and
And it speaks so. I mean, it comes to mind as I think about, the suffering in Ukraine right now. Like the sort of lived knowledge of that in Poland cannot help but be, stirred, in these moments, watching this happening next door.
Also a question from our listeners about during the ACT session, like coming back to the psychotherapy and ACT, how we can be directive from your point of view. How much here, like we should be directive during the therapy?
I don't have a formula for that. But I do think that it's really easy to be excessively directive. So I'm enough of a behavior therapist that, I probably am directive enough that a lot of psychoanalytic people would watch what I do and they'd be like, it's too directive. But I'm not a psychoanalyst. I'm a behavior analyst, and I, I'm all right with a mix of that. What I would say is that when people are nervous, like one of the things that's terribly interesting to me in ACT and is absent from most treatment manuals is that when you're doing therapy, the therapy, like the things that we do, a person coming for help, provokes patterns of action in people that are often very historically situated. They're repetitive, but it all and our interactions with them will provoke those repertoires, but it also provokes repertoires in us. We get scared. Oh, I don't know what to do, or I got to be somebody who knows what to do, and it's very easy. Yes, it's very easy, and the more the patient is struggling, the more it sort of can frighten us, and it's just so easy to, pick up a manual of things to do. It's so easy to want to tell the person what to do. And very often they want you to tell them what to do.
And many times it doesn't work.
Yes. And then it just becomes one more thing that, they feel bad about. And so I spend a lot of the time when I'm, teaching psychotherapy, I spend a lot of time getting therapists to slow down and sit with their own reactions in the therapy, to begin to try to understand their own reactions, a functional analysis of their own responding, where your reaction in the therapy is not just like a nuisance. It's actually useful to you, helpful to you. Like a simple example would be, we've all sat with clients who, you listen and you become frustrated and you just want to say, well, just
do it.
Do this, and it's like quite obvious what they need to do. But, if that first reaction that they've activated in us, they've probably activated that in hundreds of people. And they've probably activated that same reaction in themselves. And so, that first reaction that we might have, if that was going to work, it would have already worked. And so a lot of the excessive directiveness, I think, is driven by a couple of things. One is that doing psychotherapy as a creative enterprise is kind of scary. You're walking into terra ignota, unknown land. That's scary. And to become more directive and protocol driven is a way to bind that anxiety. But the purpose of therapy is not to bind the anxiety of the therapist. And and then I think, another thing that sort of drives it is that, we have been living in this era of highly protocolized therapies that sort of presume in advance to know where the therapy is going. And, imagine, I just look at my own story and where I've been, and I think it's a pretty good thing that no one did a treatment that successfully took me where I could imagine, because where I ended up was way, 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 more interesting than where I imagined. Like I imagined, if I could not not want to die every day, that would be like a miracle. Well, it was, but there were kind of some other miracles after that. So, I hope that this makes sense in terms of responding to this directiveness. What is the directiveness about? Very often the directiveness is either a kind of being too tightly bound to the protocol.
That we know what should we done and what the answer, how should look, how the response of our patient should look like. And when it's not the same as we expect, so it means that there is something wrong. Something
in a certain sense, every psychotherapy is different, because the person you're in front of, they're different. They're not the same person. They don't have the same history. The history that they do have doesn't mean the same thing to them. And if you're fortunate, you are not the same therapist. So
thanks.
I mean, imagine if you were stuck in the way that you see the world in the way that you saw the world 10 years ago. I mean, would you like to, would you do therapy the same way? Would all that
totally.
look?
No. Yeah, it's like also my first psychotherapy school, the approach was like the classic CBT, but also with psychodynamic approach. And then my thinking also evolved from, like, on the beginning, I wanted to, I'd like to have everything in order. Like, it was something that I fell in love, that you have those protocols, diagnosis, and it's such a clear. But when I start to learn and work with the patients, and when I met ACT, where on the beginning, when I met ACT, it was like for me, it's like, is it a CBT? No, it must be a joke or something. But then when I start to like doing ACT with my patients, like to not be so rigid to the diagnosis and looking more about what is really a problem for that person, like it's like makes me fall in love with ACT. So it's like and also my life events also very influenced me. Like, we change every time.
Exactly so. And I think what we can do, and so what we can do is take advantage of that. To be just a little slower, a little more tentative, a little more curious, allowing people more space to describe their own experience in their own words. And because one thing is, knowing our own experience, it's not as if we have a knowledge of it that's inside, that's either said or not said. It's known in the interaction with it, in the exchange. And so, allowing people enough time to become curious about the phenomenology of their own experience, to speak that aloud, to have another person have it be like important that they attend to it. I mean, you're going to encounter lots of people in psychotherapy who have never had that experience before, where they aren't like trying to work towards some obvious end point, like with some agenda. I think I've consulted on lots and lots of different grants, and virtually every grant I've ever consulted on, my consulting began with me going to the place where they were treating people, having them find some people who were willing to talk to me, who would be people who would qualify to be in the treatment that they were going to be in. So maybe it's head and neck cancer patients who are still smoking cigarettes. And maybe it's people who are on methadone maintenance, but they're continuing to relapse to multiple substances, including opiates. But whatever it was, wherever I went, I would ask, can you get a couple of people in so that I could interview them? And the nature of the interviews was always, help me, like I'm here to help these guys develop a treatment. I want you to help me to understand from where you sit how the world looks so that I don't help them develop a stupid treatment. Like one that would seem stupid to you because you see the world in a way that they're not seeing the world. So help me see the world as you see the world, so that I can help them, create a treatment that is more sensitive to that view. So I start with the sort of phenomenology of suffering, including suffering treatment providers.
Yeah, and I think that it shows the importance of how everyone view world differently. How I know that maybe it's typical to say that everyone knows it, but I feel how it's important to understand other people, to create some therapy for those people, because maybe it's not only it's connected with some disorders, but how many people, for example, like we said before, they know what kind of medications they need, but they don't take it. Yeah, for example, there is so big sort of the behaviors that have an influence on people. Yeah, and to understand this is very important.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, we need to understand it, and they need to understand it, and their understand. I mean, and where that understanding can be born is in that fairly open kind of description of experience, not the sort of ruminative kind of grinding, complaining. Not that way. I mean, usually people have lots of experience of that, but a more open and curious, examination of experience.
Yeah, and we need to create a kind space of consciousness that is okay to say things without anxiety of being judged, or those kinds of things. They are also important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was complaining about the context of justification, where just everything you say has to be justified. This is like the opposite of that. You don't have to justify anything about your experience. Your experience is simply what it is. But if you listen to people talk about their experience, you'll hear tons of justification. Mm-hmm. They are living in a context that tells them that who they are and what they have experienced is not justified. And, they set about trying to convince us, of the justification of it. I'm not interested in, I don't want to help people justify their experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to give them a place where they don't have to.
Yeah, where they can truly unstuck from their how to not pushing the rope, how to they can leave the rope. Yeah.
You're creating a context for creativity. I mean that's what we want for people in their lives, is that they can create something out of whatever they find there.
Yeah, like you said, it's, I think, very important for me, like that, that the psychotherapy is a creation, and it's developing how to help others, but also how with our patient that we can create also things together,
and for ourselves. I mean, some patients more than others, but I mean, they change us. I mean, that's something to be. I mean, there's creative work going on in a psychotherapy session, and it's not just on the part of the client; it's on the part of the therapist too. There's an ongoing creative process that you don't see much of that in the manual. So it's not in there. Nothing about the therapist in there.
Exactly. And because I don't want, to took you too long, your precious time. So, what would be like on the end, like your message to the therapist here in Poland, but not only in Poland, for everyone who is listening to us, like. The message about the therapy, or like what is important for you?
I feel like, especially a new therapist, I have particular sympathies for. But anybody can become a new therapist. They just have to be willing to be taught and shaped, and to sort of step into the unknown. And so I suppose that, the message I would have is that I hope that people can make a friend of that process, and a friend for life of that process. To stay curious and open, and to immerse yourself in other ways of viewing, understanding, and expressing, the human struggles. Sometimes that can be confusing when you read different therapy models, for example. Although I think it's quite valuable to listen to the ways other people talk about suffering. But also, I think literature and poetry, to sit with those things, because very often they're sensitive to the complexity and opacity of human suffering in ways that are pretty easily lost in academic writing. And I think they're important and they're valuable. They always have been for me. I've never done a training, where I didn't, quote poetry in the training. The most academic subjects I ever taught at the university, my graduate learning course, which was notoriously, brain bending, began with, quotes from a feminist theologist and Shakespeare, and it began in those places because we want to sensitize ourselves to what's important. We don't want the accounting to be more important than the thing that's being accounted for.
Your favorite quotes from the poems? Have such one?
It is unending. I suppose. Can I grab something?
Sure.
So that I can, I'll read it. I'll read you something. Okay.
Great.
All right. Just a second. I got a book right over your shelf.
Sure.
This is a collection of poems. And actually, this particular book was
yeah, I see.
Action. It's the author is John Erskine. Although you would probably
I don't know. Do we have in Polish? But
I don't know that it would even be available in English. This book was published in 1906. It was purchased for me. It was purchased for me quite appropriately by a therapist who supervised me when I was a graduate student, who was deeply, deeply interested in storytelling and understanding human suffering through that angle. And she and I read a lot together. We read like the Iliad together and, things like that. I mean, it was so marvelous and so different from, more kind of technical analyses. And so what I'm going to read you here is the end of a poem about a character in Greek mythology named Actaeon. And so let me tell you just a little bit about Actaeon to sort of set up this quote. So Actaeon is like hunting. And so he's out moving through the forest, and he's got his hounds, but he's out ahead of his dogs, And as he moves through the forest, he pushes the, leaves the brush aside in some place, and when you read the poem, you can feel the physicality of it.
You feel it, this halting,
of him moving, with this energy through the forest, and he pulls the brush to one side, and he finds the goddess Diane bathing in this pool, and he's like completely, smitten by her beauty. He's just captivated by the beauty of this goddess bathing. And she has this moment where she is kind of embarrassed. So she flips the water at Actaeon, and the water begins to transform Actaeon from a man into like a deer, and he can feel like his bow drops from his hand, and he can feel the antlers sprouting from his head. And he can hear his dogs coming, and he knows that he's going to be killed
by his dogs.
Yes, but she's so beautiful to him that he can't leave, And so in this moment, the goddess Diane sees in Actaeon's eyes that he's not going to leave, that he's going to stay, and that he's going to be killed. And she has this like moment of pity. And in that moment, she becomes even more beautiful. So Actaeon is killed.
Terrible situation.
So Actaeon is killed by his hounds, and he goes he goes to Hades. So in Greek mythology, you go to Hades and you drink from the river Lethe. And the river Lethe is the river of forgetting. And so Actaeon goes there, and he sees all these people pouring down to this river and drinking. And he's asking, what is going on here? And people tell him, you drink from the river, and everything that has come before is gone. And they tell him, if your life was horrible, all that, is washed away. And if your life was wonderful, but you can't have it now, then that is washed away, and they invite him to drink. And so this is Actaeon's response. He says, one draught of Lethe for a world of pain, an easy bargain. Yet I keep the thorn to keep the rose. I will remember Diane. If I forget, who shall remain to tell what beauty was? Perchance the gods have kept some unillumined corner of deep hell to brighten with this memory. This I know, they have no power to take her from me, more than she could keep me from her in the world, nor death could keep me. Slowly turned he then, where the dark country sleeps beneath the gloom, and as he went, the glory of his face spread gleams before him, like the coming dawn, trailed brightness after, like the fading day, and when he passed, the quiet gloom returned. Isn't that magnificent?
Yeah.
For a long time, especially the couplet, one draught of Lethe for a world of pain, an easy bargain, yet I keep the thorn to keep the rose.
Yeah,
those are words to live by in my world.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this story and the poem, and I think that it's very deep, and like I think that we could do also an episode to talk about like the pain and the metaphors that they are here. Beautiful,
I'll send you a link to a place where people can find the poem online.
Great, please.
In English at least, and so you can point people at this.
I think that it will influence many people. I'm sure about it, and I put this link in our description of our episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your precious time. It was an honor, and I'm delighted that we could meet and that to have this interview. So thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart, and and hope maybe someday to chat somewhere. It was an honor, and thank you very, very much.
Maybe someday we'll do an interview where we'll just talk about poetry and psychotherapy.
Yeah, sure. It's like it shows how our language and we could do also different episode about how it's metaphors, poems, how it's important and emotional, how it touches many notes in us. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's good talking to you, Adam.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.